Well, hello, friends. This is Dennis Sanders. I am the pastor of First Christian Church of St. Paul, Disciples of Christ, located in Roseville, Minnesota. And welcome to At the Intersection. So last week's video, we talked a little bit about the shooting that occurred in Kansas City of an African-American teenager, Ralph Yarl, by an 84-year-old gentleman. And I talked about the erosion of trust in our society. And the fact is, I'm still thinking about this. I think that 21st century America, we've lost a sense of trust in one another. And I think that that has led to a disintegration in civil society. But this past week I was reading an article called Bullying in Fear, and it was by a professor at Michigan State University. And she was writing about this really in light of the shootings that took place at Michigan State earlier this year. And really talking about the fact of how American society, we are really kind of losing the bonds that kind of could bring us together. That civil society, churches, organizations, kind of mutual groups, those type of things are breaking down. And what is the result is a lot of these wrong place shootings that we've been seeing lately, where people end up doing just kind of a thing of making a mistake, turning into a driveway, going to the wrong house. And they end up paying for it by people who are fearful. She includes some words in her essays from Alexis de Tocqueville from his very well-known book, Democracy in America. And Tocqueville was fascinated by American society. And he knew or could see that it was these social interactions among individuals that mattered, and that it mattered if we wanted to have a free society. Woolf notes that Tocqueville believed in, and I quote from her, interactions in formal governmental settings like local government or township meetings, or those of more informal settings like civic associations such as temperance societies or festival committees or houses of worship. And these were foundational to fostering what he, Tocqueville, referred to in French as les liens, translated as the bonds of affection that link individuals to one another in a society and give them feelings of duty and obligation toward one another. Because there are these institutions out here that are allowing for people to come together, as Woolf has said, and as echoing de Tocqueville, it kind of provides that glue that really holds our society together and allows people to care for one another. And Tocqueville talks about what happens when, let's say here in America, something was blocking a road. And he says, quote, an obstruction occurs on a public road, the way is interrupted, traffic stops, the neighbors soon get together as a deliberative body. And out of this improvised assembly will come an executive power that will remedy the difficulty. Now, the opposite of this, according to Tocqueville, is that when you don't have these associations, people become weak and impotent, and they don't help one another as freely. And I remember this encounter between Ralph Yarl and the elderly gentleman. And I'm guessing that that gentleman lived his life very much alone. And the only thing that kept him company was TV, which was on cable news, which in some ways kind of fed him a steady diet of fear and isolation. We're living at a time in a society today where there are fewer and fewer social interactions. We don't have the kind of associations and organizations that allow for people to meet people, and we have become isolated. There was some hope that maybe social media would be that thing that could bring people together, and this is not to blame social media for everything, but we have used it more to isolate one another than to really bring people together. I'm thinking about this, and I'm also thinking I'm getting ready for my sermon on Sunday, and I'm going to be preaching from Acts 2, 42 through 47. It's one of my favorite passages, and it's a description of the early church. We hear about how the church devoted themselves to, and this is what the Bible says, teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And it even says that no one really was in need because the people cared for each other. They saw what they had as something that could be shared with one another. This is in some ways that glue, that kind of mutual bond of affection that Tocqueville is talking about. You know, when I think about these wrong place shootings and the lack of trust and the lack of trust in institutions especially, I wonder where the church fits in. The church is one of those organizations that Tocqueville was talking about. This passage, I think, gives a clue of a church being a place that can create those bonds of affection. And we know that as Christians because we know that we are called and we come to care for one another, to know and to pattern ourselves after Jesus, who lived for others. We learn to be followers of Jesus who care for the other. Now, of course, the church, like any organization, is made up of humans, so it's not perfect. If you read more of the book of Acts, you're going to find people who lie and cheat and steal. And yet, God uses the church to care for others, both within the church and without. And the church can be a place that breaks down the barriers that we have set up and allow us to actually see each other as a fellow being and maybe not be so fearful of the stranger that knocks on the door. Sharon Watkins, who is the former general minister and president of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, once talked about learning to stay at the communion table with people that you don't agree with. Now, trying to maintain a relationship with people that you may not see eye to eye on is always going to be a challenge. But it's in that staying together, coming together at God's table, maybe even worshiping together, praying for one another, is that you get to see those bonds of affection being built up. Staying at God's table allows us to see each other, and it allows for God to work in us and through us. And maybe by staying at the table, the frayed bonds of our society can be reknit and made whole again. Our society is broken. The news keeps telling us that. But can we, who claim to be followers of Jesus, allow God to help us, to weave us together inside of the church, and then to take that out into the world, to reknit those frayed bonds in our society? Take care. Godspeed, and I'll see you soon.